Let's talk about fast and slow stipple shading. Fast stipple shading can produce inconsistent results because the needle does not have enough time to deposit the dots in a clean and consistent manner. Which means if we're moving too fast, every dot that we deposit is going to have different spacing in between each dot, and each dot is also going to have a different needle depth. What that means is some dots are going to be darker than others, and over time as we begin to layer on with inadequate speed, we're going to get blotchy, inconsistent results. So to me, what that means is over time of applying stipple shading at a faster pace with a lower voltage, we're going to begin to notice that the depth and spacings are off, and those fluctuations are going to read when we're done with the tattoo. The tattoo is going to come out spotty, blotchy, the shading is going to be hard to read, or it's going to have an overall rough appearance if we're moving too fast. Where we have slow stippling, where it's quite the opposite. When running at a lower voltage and aligning my hand speed to my voltage, I'm able to accomplish smoother, cleaner shades. I'm able to accomplish smoother and cleaner shades because each dot is evenly spaced, and also I'm also focused on the needle depth, which is going to produce the same tone for those dots. So if I'm moving at a slow and consistent spot, everything is going to appear smoother because of those spacings, how they neighbor one another well, and because of the needle depth of the dots that I'm depositing. When we align our hand speed to our voltage and we find a good healthy tempo for us to stipple at, the results are going to read as smoother because, again, as I've mentioned, each dot that we apply is going to be evenly spaced to the neighboring line. On top of that, the depth of each dot is also going to reflect the depth that we are applying. So even if my hand speed was aligned to my voltage and I'm moving at a steady spot, if I'm going too deep, then I'm probably going to be going too dark too quickly, or I'm not going to have varying tones such as light, mids, and darks. Before I get into the demonstration, I want to exhaust how important it is to focus on the spacing of each individual dot that we lay down and focusing on the needle depth. I cannot exhaust that enough. These two variables, the spacing in between each dot and the depth of each dot, is what's going to contribute to that smooth, clean read when the tattoo is done, but not only done, when it's fully healed. As I've mentioned, if we're wanting a sort of lighter appearance, then we're going to want to focus on just using the very tip of our needle. The deeper the dot, the darker it's going to be. If we're wanting a sort of lighter stipple shade, then we're going to want to work off the very tip of our needle and learn how to just use the tip of the needle and brush the dots into the skin, which is exactly what I am going to show you now. So first and foremost, I'm going to be using an Inkclaw. This is going to be the black Tortoise tattoo machine right here. I'm going to be running at 4 volts even for this demonstration. I'm also using a CNC Police. This is going to be a 003 round liner. That right there is my needle depth. That's where I'm hanging out my needle. Feel free to adjust that as needed. I want to be able to see my needle tip as I'm applying my stipple shading, which is why I hang it out a little bit more. If you are just beginning, then I don't encourage you to hang out your needle until you feel like you're ready. What I want to start with is demonstrating what fast stipple shading would look like and similar results that we can get. Granted, this is going to vary from artist to artist, but the idea, meaning the results that I get, should still apply to every single artist if we're incorrectly or correctly applying these techniques. So moving too fast would look a little something like this. So I have a very low voltage, and this is a comfortable voltage for me to shade at. But if I don't pay attention to my hand speed or my depth, then I'm gonna get really blotchy results. So if I go like this, you can see that the spacing between each dot is not by any means consistent or neighboring one another well. Let me wipe away, and you can see how the dots are kind of all over the place. Let me kind of show you here. Let's wipe away. And that right there is exactly what moving too fast would look like. Now for some, I'm sure for some this may read okay, but for me, when I stipple shade, I want a really smooth appearance. I want a really smooth read when I am done. And you can see that doing this, the dots are just spaced too far apart for me to get any sort of consistency, as you can see. I'm gonna repeat the fast stippling right over this area that I just did to kind of mimic building up layers of shade so you can kind of see the results. So you're going to notice not only am I not focused on the spacing in between each pixel, you're going to notice that the spacing in between each line that I'm creating is also inconsistent. And not only that, my needle depth is way off as well. So some dots are going to be lighter, some dots are going to be darker. Over time, if I keep layering it like this is exactly how I'm going to accomplish that sort of blotchy, inconsistent result. It's just moving way too fast for the needle to do anything practical, as you can see right here. These are the blotchy, inconsistent results. So if your stipple shading is looking like this and your pixels are too far apart, the little dots that you're creating are too far apart, you're definitely moving too fast. Let me try this again and kind of give you another demonstration here. So you can see, like, it doesn't even look right either. It looks like I'm being more aggressive than what's necessary. To me, it just doesn't look right, the application. And you can see that all the dots are coming out the same pretty much tone. They're really just getting straight to the saturation. As you can see, there's no varying tones, just a little bit right here, but the majority of the dots are the same in terms of tone. They're all really, really dark and saturated. If I keep doing this, I'm going to end up with blotchy results. There's no way around that. And this is pretty much, from my opinion, I guess from my experience, when people are experiencing inconsistent results, especially when it comes to any sort of shading, it's probably because their fundamentals are unaligned. You're probably either moving too fast, you're too rough with the depth, something along those lines is off. But you can see though, let me kind of repeat this one last time so you can see how wrong this is here. So that sort of application just even looks all kinds of wrongs in my opinion. Let's go ahead and wipe away. And I'm not getting any sort of shading. As you can see, I'm just getting textures here now. So at this point, all I'm doing is just texturizing the skin. If I were to be shading, let's say this were design and this area has to have been shaded, well, you can see that I'm off to a bad start because there's no transitions, there's no shading or anything here. There's just this right here. It's just like dots and texture, so to speak. This is exactly the results of fast stipple shading. You can kind of anticipate, if I just keep doing this and doing this and doing this, we're gonna go nowhere fast. Let me demonstrate what slow stippling would look like. So still running at the same voltage, we're not going to change that. We're gonna still run at 4 volts even. All I'm going to do now is, I'm going to do everything that I didn't do over here. I'm going to be mindful of my hand speed to my voltage. I'm gonna be mindful of my needle depth and my deposits where I start and finish. So I'm gonna kind of identify where I need to start, which is right here, and kind of right here is where my finish. So I'm going to whip out this way. And you're gonna notice that when I start moving at a more consistent, steadier pace, the dots are gonna be closer together, as you can see. Not only that, not only are the dots reflecting one another much more consistently, you can see the lines are now more closer together. And this is exactly how we go about getting that sort of smooth, stippled look. So if you're struggling getting a smooth stipple shade, as I mentioned, it's probably because your technical application may be a little off. Another very important thing that I feel like I should say is I'm using just the very tip of the needle. You're gonna see here that I'm not really driving the skin into, I'm not driving the needle into the skin. As you can see, still moving consistently neighboring each line, and I'm working off the tip, creating like a brush-like motion. So I introduce the needle like kind of like a ramp, like a half pipe, where I come in this way and then I whip out. That's how I am doing this sort of shading right here to get these results. So if I were to clean this off the bat, this first layer should already prove to be getting shades. So you can definitely see that I'm correct here. If I hold it up this way, you can see this first layer is now accomplishing shades. Over here it's a little bit darker and we're going out to a transition this way. If I do this a few more times, you're definitely gonna see the shading from darker to lighter, which is what I want to show you. And it's gonna also come out more cleaner than this one up here, and it's actually going to look like shading. So you can see each line has to be spaced next to one another well. And not only that, the pixels have to be, the dots I call them pixels and dots, those have to be spaced evenly. And on top of that, I'm focusing on my needle depth, making sure that I'm not going too deep. So those are the 3 variables that I'm considering. I'm considering the spaces between each dot that I'm applying, I'm considering the spaces between each line that I create, and I'm considering the needle depth. Aligning to my hand speed to my voltage, and you can see how cleaner and consistent this one looks versus the one that I just showed you up top. If I go ahead and put a little bit of ointment, let's wipe away, and let me get the glare off to show you again how this is coming out. So now we are getting shading. You can see we're starting right here lighter, and then we're starting right here darker, and we're gradually getting lighter as we whip out that way. Even just looking at this piece of skin right here, you can see that this right here just doesn't look right, especially if we're going for shading. I would understand if we're going for like textures and we want a sort of peppered look, then this would be a good way to go about applying peppered texture in a larger area. However, if we need to be real meticulous with deposits and we are in fact trying to shade, then we're definitely going to want to be aligning those fundamentals. We're going to want to pay attention to the spacing between each dot, the spacing between each line that we create, and we're also going to be paying attention to that needle depth. When I say needle depth, it's also nothing like lining. I don't let my needle hit the skin and then line. I am using the needle and brushing at a very, very light pace, very, very light onto the skin, so that way I can build up the shades as opposed to overwork or get to the shade too quickly or go too dark. I'm going to turn it to the side here and do a little bit of cross hatching as well to kind of help smooth things out. And I'm going to do the same way, but just with some pendulum motions, so you can see that I'm still focusing on the spacing between each pixel, each dot. I'm focusing on my pendulum motions here and my needle depth, as I don't want to drive the needle into the skin like that. There we go. Just very, very light brush motions, keeping my hand speed aligned to my voltage, being mindful of my needle depth, being mindful of the spaces between each dot and each line as well that I create. And you can see after some cross hatching, it's not only creating more saturation, but it's also smoothing things out as well. So you can now see that I'm starting I'm starting darker and going to lighter here. And you can see where this side right here, where we're moving just simply too fast, has no sort of transition at all. It's very important to note that some artists stipple at 4 volts, some artists stipple at 4.5, some stipple at 5. There's even some artists that I've seen stipple at 8 volts and get fantastic results. So what I am saying is there isn't necessarily a right or a wrong when it comes to applying this sort of stipple shading here. I think that if we are accomplishing what we are setting out to do, meaning if we are looking to get textures, then this is going to be a better way to go. But if we're looking to get shades and transitions along with a sort of peppered look, then this is definitely going to be the technique to go with. It really comes down to what's right for you and your style of tattooing and for what you want to accomplish with your tattoo. Correct stippling. So that's what stipple shading and moving way too fast looks like with a low voltage. Now the only time that we can get away with moving this fast is if our voltage is moving that fast. So you can see that I'm not worrying about my needle depth, I'm not paying attention to any of those variables, and I'm also not getting any sort of shading. I'm just getting texture, so to speak, as you can see. If you are just starting out, I do not recommend stippling at a higher voltage for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, when we are stippling, we're typically using a smaller needle such as a 3-round liner or a 5-round liner. That means that it's going to be really easy to open and penetrate the skin. So if we're just starting out and we're not familiar with the technique that's required to apply stipple shading, then we could be doing more damage than good. Here's the thing, if I were to bump it up to around, let's say, maybe like, let's do 5.5 volts, which is tremendously faster on this Black Tortoise machine. I can now move my hand speed a little bit faster to accommodate my faster hand speed, as you can see, and I'm still getting even spacing between my pixels and my lines. Now, I don't recommend going straight to this just because you want to work faster. I would recommend learning at a lower voltage and getting comfortable with the technique and being able to apply it on demand each and every time before you want to use different settings. So just to confirm, don't go straight to stippling at a higher voltage, because as you can hear, let's go back to 5.5, it gets much more aggressive, and if we're not familiar with that technique, then we're going to be doing a lot of damage to the skin. So if you are wanting to work faster, it's better to get comfortable with stipple shading first, and then you can kind of build up your speed to something that's more suitable for your new workflow. So as you can see, I'm still getting transitions there. I'm getting dark to light points right here, even at a higher voltage. And from here, I would just keep building up. But that's because I already have my technique down. I'm able to work off the tip of my needle before I cause any sort of damage. And that took me a while to get there. So if you were just starting out and you're, maybe stressed about not being able to shade, shading is a world of its own, and it is something that we have to be patient and collected with in order to learn and progress each and every day that we are trying. So to conclude this video, I want to say that there isn't necessarily a set voltage to get clean, smooth stipple shading. As I've mentioned, some use 4, some artists use 5, some artists even use 8 volts to stipple. It's really going to depend on how you want your workflow to go, what you feel comfortable with. As I've mentioned, I don't really feel like there is a necessarily right or a wrong. However, if we are getting, traumatized results on the skin, well, then that's obviously going to be wrong. So what I would recommend if you were just starting out with stipple shading is to start at a lower voltage and work on the spacing between each dot, work on the spacing between each line, and then work on the needle depth. Try to get comfortable with working just off the very tip of your needle. That will be it for this one. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to drop a comment down below. I'm going to do my best to assist you in the best possible direction. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and ring that bell for me, as I will be bringing more videos like this for you all. With that being said, I appreciate you, your time, and your support. Thank you for watching. You have a great day. Are you wanting to develop your tattooing skill sets? Now you can practice and develop anytime, any place with an assortment of tattooing workbooks that I've created. With these assorted tattooing workbooks, we can practice our basic lining all the way to advanced lining. We can practice shading, shading placement, dot work, textures, and more. All we are gonna need is a tattoo workbook of mine. We can use a pencil, pen. We can even use a tattoo machine with a ballpoint cartridge to develop our tattooing abilities further. That means that we don't need tattoo ink, we don't need napkins or petroleum jelly to get to practicing. Simply open one of my tattooing workbooks and get going. It really is that easy. You can get your hands on one of my developmental tattooing assorted workbooks by simply clicking the links in my description or in the pinned comment section below, or navigating on over to Amazon.com, typing in Daniel Yuck, and you'll see all of the assorted tattoo workbooks that I've created come up. If you have an Amazon account, be sure to follow my Amazon author page as well, as I would greatly appreciate your support. Should you have any questions at all, drop them in the comment section down below. I will do my best to assist you in the best possible direction. With that being said, let's get right back into this video.